destiny has provided both Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela a wonderful opportunity to save this planet from nuclear war. The only requirement would be to dialogue so that the Dragon deal goes through. The Caribbean is experiencing stress as a side effect from the Ukraine war. United States intends to deploy Tomahawk nuclear missiles into Ukraine, and in retaliation, Russia intends to deploy Oreshnik nuclear missiles in Venezuela. Any further escalation might lead to disappearance of the human species. The maritime border between Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela separates lands that are close to each other, and there has usually been commerce and tourism between both countries. In particular, Trinidadians have long visited Margarita Island on the Caribbean coast of Venezuela. Trinidad and Tobago faces the issue of new gas fields to feed its existing liquefied natural gas infrastructure, while Venezuela has ample quantities of such gas, and a deal between both countries could be feasible if authorities of both countries at the highest level begin their diplomatic and commercial engagement. Venezuelan side, however, requires maritime security in the Caribbean, as our country is threatened by military invasion from the United States, which is a close ally of Trinidad and Tobago, while Venezuela is a close ally of the other main nuclear power, the Russian Federation. In the United Nations, Venezuela counts with approval with most countries that lean toward Russia, while Trinidad and Tobago enjoys support from the countries that are mostly aligned with the United States. If Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago are able to decrease hostilities and work for the common benefit of an operating Dragon gas field, further diplomacy could bridge Venezuela's relations with Trinidad and Tobago's allies, and similarly, Trinidad and Tobago's relations with Venezuela's allies could also increase. This divergence is also seen at CARICOM, where some of the islands support Venezuela, while Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, and Jamaica geopolitically are in favor of the United States. The war on the Caribbean is just a proxy of a wider war between Russia and the United States. If the local people of the Caribbean countries, including Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela, start thinking of our common Caribbean Sea as our common sphere of influence, Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago could have an opportunity to de-escalate and propose some common grounds, prioritizing security. Prime Minister Kamla Persad of Trinidad and Tobago would like more security to defend the borders of Trinidad and Tobago so that the entrance into the country of illegal migrants and narcotics and other kinds of prohibited merchandise are forbidden. If the militaries of Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago, if the Coast Guard of Venezuela and the Coast Guard of Trinidad and Tobago start deploying bilateral agreements between neighboring countries while maintaining as secondary their military alliances with Russia and the United States, perhaps a better outcome would be profitable for the citizens of Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago. Meanwhile, we will refresh the investment opportunities of gas fields within Venezuela, moving from west to east. North of the Paria Peninsula and west of the island of Trinidad lies the Caribbean Sea, which holds Mariscal Antonio José de Sucre gas fields offshore, which are divided in 4 main blocks. The westernmost block lies north of the city of Rio Caribe at Arismendi municipality of Sucre State. It is the most remote from Trinidad and closest to major population centers in Venezuela such as Rio Caribe and Carúpano. Gas exploitation there would be suitable if on the Venezuelan coast, perhaps around San Juan de las Galdonas town, a new liquefied natural gas facility is built, which at this time does not look as a priority. Moving east, we have Mejillones Block, which is north of the town of Mejillones, which also features deposits of gas reserves. East of Mejillones, we have the block of Patao, which is north of the town of Puerto de Hierro, still in Paria Peninsula. And we are approaching Dragon, which is the main gas field that has been sought for development first, which is north of the town of Macuro in Paria Peninsula, which is a town where Christopher Columbus arrived into Venezuela in 1498. All these towns in Paria Peninsula feature miserable living conditions which have entailed much of their population to engage in illegal activity, as the tourism and fishing potential has suffered from a lack of infrastructure and a lack of banking credit. They need schools, they need roads, they need telecommunications, they need increased presence from the Sucre state government, they need increased presence from the municipal government of Arismendi, which is many kilometers out west in Rio Caribe, and the mountain conditions of Paria Peninsula have made it very impractical to build a road on the northern shore of the Caribbean Sea, which would communicate with the gas fields. There is a road connecting the southern towns on the southern shore of Paria Peninsula, which is bathed by the Gulf of Paria, which is the Gulf shared between Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela. On the Trinidad side, well-known towns on Gulf of Paria include Port of Spain, Chaguanas, and San Fernando. The easternmost point of continental Venezuela is Punta Peñas, and a little bit to the east is Isla de Patos, which holds a military frontier border unit. And a little bit to the east, you have Chacachacare Island under Trinidadian sovereignty. And a little bit to the east, you get to Chaguaramas and Port of Spain in mainland Trinidad Island. East of Trinidad, we go into the Atlantic Ocean, and after several kilometers of Trinidad sovereignty, we arrive to the maritime border between Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela again. Venezuela holds that part of the Atlantic Ocean due to being north of Delta Amacuro State, where the Orinoco River arrives into the Atlantic Ocean. Plataforma Deltana gas fields, which are also close to Trinidad, but on the eastern side of Trinidad, have not been developed yet, but they are also to the interest of Trinidad and Tobago authorities looking for alternative sources of gas to feed their existing liquefied natural gas infrastructure. Plataforma Deltana Block 1 is called Dorado Capoc and holds reserves of gas. Plataforma Deltana 2 is very well known, and there have been conversations with both Chevron and Shell oil companies, Chevron on the part of Venezuela and Shell on the part of Trinidad, so that they begin operations on Plataforma Deltana Block 2, also known as Loran Manatí. Plataforma Deltana 3 is between blocks 1 and 2, looking southwards towards the Orinoco Delta. It is a high acreage block, and it has not been touched yet. Negotiations with PDVSA are required for initiating operations in any of the blocks described, as they fall under Venezuelan sovereignty. We also have Platform Deltana Block 4, Cocuina Manaquin, whose abundant gas resources have already been an interest of Shell Oil Company through previous negotiations. Trinidad engaged with the authorization of the Venezuelan government in the good old days when we had OFAC licenses and there was no military deployment in the Caribbean. Such conversations should resume whenever feasible. The easternmost block on Plataforma Deltana is Plataforma Deltana Block number 5, which extends all the way east into the disputed Essequibo maritime extension. We don't know the exact easternmost limit of Plataforma Deltana 5 because the Venezuelan and Guyanese maritime borders have not been defined yet as a consequence of the old land Essequibo dispute. It is necessary that Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, and Venezuela dialogue for coordination of our exploitation of our common Caribbean resources. Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, and Venezuela need a common oil and gas strategy, including processing and refinery, so that we get a unified voice that projects power within negotiations with Chevron, Shell, British Petroleum, ExxonMobil, Total, and other international petroleum majors. Plataforma Deltana Block 5 is huge. And if you continue east on their Guyana-controlled maritime space, you would get into Stabroek offshore fields, which, as we know, have excellent deposits of hydrocarbons, which are currently exploited by an association of ExxonMobil, Chevron, and the National Oil Company of China. Looking back into Trinidad, south of the city of San Fernando, you get to the city of Icacos, whose beach is relatively close to Pedernales in Delta Amacuro state in Venezuela, as you would have to cross again the maritime international border. It would be extremely useful if negotiations between Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela include a new ferry line that will connect the towns of Icacos in Trinidad and Pedernales in Delta Amacuro, Venezuela. Pedernales has a legacy oil and gas facility which should also be considered for refurbishing, as the city of Pedernales is the headquarters for Venezuelan exploitation of oil blocks 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 of Plataforma Deltana. That means if Shell or Total would like to explore resources at Loran Manatí, Dorado Capoc, Cocuina Manaquim, Plataforma Deltana 3, or Plataforma Deltana 5, they should consider investing into the city of Pedernales to improve its schools, hospitals, and a possible road into Tucupita, which is the capital of Delta Amacuro state. Most of the transport is done by boats across the Orinoco River. However, land transportation and perhaps a pipeline would be necessary as requirements for development of Plataforma Deltana increase. Finally, if you continue deep into Venezuela's south to the southernmost part of Delta Amacuro state and turn west into Monagas, you get into the Orinoco River at the world-famous Orinoco Belt Carabobo block, which should also be an interesting opportunity for Trinidad and Tobago to offer investment opportunities for Venezuela. Because we seek that both Venezuelans and Trinidadians are satisfied with a mutually beneficial deal. Blocks for the easternmost part of Carabobo oil belt fields have not been allocated yet. Only the western part of the Carabobo fields in less remote areas of Monagas state are prioritized. but the ending section of the Orinoco Belt, which is mostly in eastern Monagas and perhaps a small portion of southern Delta Amacuro State, remain unassigned. It would be glorious that Trinidad and Tobago, along with an offer for Dragon, Loran Manatee, and Coquina Manakin, also offers development opportunities for Pedernales, Carabobo Orinoco Belt, and perhaps Patao or Mejillones. As we can see, there are plenty of investment opportunities for Trinidad and Tobago into Venezuela, and we must remember that both President Nicolás Maduro and Delcy Rodriguez have repeatedly stated that they are open for investment from anywhere in the world. Unfortunately, the geopolitical times we have right now are stressing security. The Venezuelan side is interested in the security of provided by our military with the help of equipment that arrived from China, Iran, and Russia to deter United States military, while Trinidad and Tobago's approach to security is to make sure that no narcotics and no illegal immigrants arrive from Venezuela. And both countries have a point. Both countries have valid concerns. We must seek whatever little window of understanding there is, because Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela are partners in CARICOM and in CELAC, and we should no longer tolerate that CARICOM is a divided Caribbean organization. In order to increase relationships of both Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela with the rest of the CARICOM, we should also explore oil and gas investment opportunities in Grenada, where many deposits have been discovered, Jamaica, where huge deposits have been discovered, Cuba, where also huge deposits have been discovered north of Varadero Beach, and across Central America, we have Spanish Lookout oil field near Belmopan in Belize, which is certainly welcoming investment in its oil industry, while Venezuela thanks Belize for its support during the Venezuela-United States issue, which contrasts with neighboring Guatemala, which also has oil and gas fields in San Petén, close to the border of Belize. We have the situation that Guatemala and Belize are usually at odds, just as Venezuela and Guyana are at odds, but we have good relations between Belize and Venezuela, which speak different languages, and you have good relations between Panama and Guyana, which also speak different languages. It doesn't make any sense that in the Caribbean, geopolitics have made us fought between ourselves within geopolitical divisions that do not necessarily correspond to the languages spoken by the populations of affected Caribbean and Central American countries. Therefore, to summarize, Trinidad and Tobago, along with Venezuela investments, should also consider the oil and gas deposits available in Grenada, Jamaica, Cuba, Belize, and Guatemala. And of course, looking east of Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela, we have our sister countries of Suriname and Guyana, both of which have excellent deposits of hydrocarbons and whose industries are rapidly being developed, even though business conditions for Guyana are increasingly seen as unfavorable. And that is a point that Venezuela wishes to stress out. Venezuelan authorities are likely concerned that Trinidad and Tobago will seek exploiting Venezuelan gas and oil resources at a predatory manner in the fashion ExxonMobil does in Guyana, which by this time should probably not be the case. It is urgent for CARICOM to convoke a regional meeting so that all the countries described, plus other consumer countries that would be benefited, such as St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, Dominica, Antigua and Barbuda, and St. Kitts and Nevis, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic, might decrease the price of imports of oil and gas if the other countries that produce or are set to produce in the near future hydrocarbons industry products can have a sovereign and unified stance on how to develop and how to market. If Caribbean countries can unite among ourselves little by little, our military problems will de-escalate. Even militarily, this would be a sound option for us, as if the commercial interests of Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago and later Guyana start converging, we might soon speak of a Caribbean defense treaty that would sum up the best of Venezuelan, Russian, Chinese, and Iranian-made capabilities of weapons, unified with the United States capabilities provided by the United States to Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana. Therefore, the Caribbean could count on one of the modern and most diverse military inventory of military equipment in the planet, and we would be able to defend ourselves increasingly through our own means rather than being at this uncomfortable situation where Prime Minister Kamala has to speak to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, while Foreign Minister Ivan Hill has to speak to Russian Foreign Secretary Lavrov, as it happened earlier this morning. God bless Trinidad and Tobago, God bless Guyana, and God bless Venezuela. And let's pray that everything will work out well. I like the strength shown by Prime Minister Kamala Persad when she, against all odds, secured an OFAC license for Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela, coming from Marco Rubio, while everyone else was thinking it was going to be impossible. I invite Prime Minister Kamala Persad to continue setting high standards in her goals. She will probably be met by formidable resistance by Venezuelan government officials such as President Maduro, Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, Foreign Minister Ivan Hill, and President of PDVSA, Héctor Obregón, and Venezuelan Defense Minister Padrino Lopez, as all of them have legitimate concerns on not being screwed up on the terms of the deals and not being screwed up on military incursions by the United States that may be hiding behind the gracious conciliatory tone of Trinidad and Tobago authorities. Venezuela should stress out that the OFAC licenses, if they are not to allow cash payments to Venezuela, they should at least ensure that needed developments in roads, schools, hospitals, and refineries and pipelines are available for PDVSA and the Venezuelan population, which desperately needs economic development. Please do a search of the towns of Macuro, Macuro, and Guiria, and Mejillones in Paria Peninsula, and you will realize the extreme poverty conditions all of them endure, as they are in urgent need of investment so that their populations can have opportunities for economic development away from illegal activities.